Curiosity for me, in the business sense, it changes how makes a shift in how we think, how we work, and how we connect. And how we think is all about adopting a growth mindset. Looking beyond our current limitations, our current situations, and thinking bigger. I think a lot of times our fears, our comforts, our habits get in the way of that. And on the work side, it's all about creating operational excellence, which I define as an organization's ability to achieve its intended results as efficiently and effectively as possible. And that's what you need to be doing in our organizations, is making constant changes and adaptations to what we're seeing while keeping the engine running.
Well, Jon, thank you for coming on our podcast. Could you please tell us a little bit about your professional background and what made you start Lateral Solutions?
Yeah, so my professional background is kind of different. I went to law school and did not know what I wanted to do with my law degree. I fell into working for a legal organization. I was a member of law school, where I traveled the country doing leadership training with chapter leaders at law schools and that sort of thing. And so it led initially into a career in association management, which was not my radar at all. But that led into a career on the operational side of businesses and associations. And it actually led me into the startup world. My second association I worked for was a tech trade association that was a startup that worked with startups. And so fast forward a little bit later, when I started Lateral Solutions, I started working with a lot of startups, both for-profit and nonprofit, helping them launch operations. And then stayed on as a fractional COO. We've now transitioned that to more of a consulting role, where we help analyze operations for efficiency and growth, and provide a roadmap to fill the gaps and holes that are holding companies back.
Working with nonprofit versus for-profit, are there some common or distinct dysfunctions that you see?
Yeah, I think for the most part, very similar. When you take outside the tax aspect of it, especially working with a lot of associations, they very much run like a business, with sales, with marketing, a lot different than your traditional nonprofit. And so there's a lot of similarities. And I'd say, across the board, they tend to have the very same problems that they face: lack of operations, not having a culture that really drives innovation, growth, and change, that sort of thing.
So when it comes to the operational side, understanding is that you're a big advocate of curiosity as an operating system. I'm a big fan of it from a kind of social perspective. I think we should lead with it always. What would you say that looks like in practice in an operating world?
Yeah, so curiosity for me, in the business sense, it changes how makes a shift in how we think, how we work, and how we connect. And how we think is all about adopting a growth mindset, looking beyond our current limitations, our current situations, and thinking bigger. I think a lot of times our fears, our comforts, our habits get in the way of that. And on the work side, it's all about, creating operational excellence, which I define as an organization's ability to achieve its intended results as efficiently and effectively as possible. And one way I really kind of put a term around that as well is looking at agile development, which is a term in the software world where you're constantly coding and recoding and making changes on the back end while the app is still functioning, or the website still functioning, whatever it is. And that's what you'd be doing in our organizations, is making constant changes and adaptations to what we're seeing while keeping the engine running. And the last part of the connection part is about creating a curious culture, creating a culture where everyone in the organization has a voice, and people are encouraged to when they see something, say something. If they see a problem, they find a solution. They're able to bring that up and help the organization grow and change from every level of the organization.
And on the subway here, we have a saying which is "see it, say it, sorted." Right.
Mhm.
So you see something, you say it, and then it's dealt with, and it's done. And it's obviously memorable, but I think it works across the board if people feel that they have the space to do that, because there are some organizations that might not have the space to do that.
Yeah, I think, there's still a lot of kind of old school way of looking at leadership and management, very top down. The management, the leadership have to have the answers, have to solve the problems, have to be the visionary for which direction we're going. And they tend to leave out the people who are actually doing the work, who are the ones that can really say, hey, look, this isn't working. I've sat in many staff meetings where, the CEO or manager points out some problem that just occurred to them. They go to the person who handles that task. It's like, oh yeah, I've always known this problem. Or and they get mad at the employee. And the real answer needs to be like, why didn't I create an atmosphere that allowed the employee to speak up and bring that problem to me so we could have solved it quicker.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree.
When you enter into an organization to do like an initial audit, could you walk us through like what you're looking for in that first week and how you measure success from there?
Yeah. So we have a kind of a four-step process in our audit where we're looking at decision making alignment, culture, operational strength and maturity, and the efficiency of their internal operations. And really looking at all four of those components together gives us a real good insight into what's working and not working in that organization.
That's great. And do you partner with someone, or is that something that you developed yourself? You're like internal 360 or something?
So some of the assessments I've developed myself, some of them I license. So it's a little bit of both.
Okay, great. And what's the fastest win you've ever seen?
I worked with a startup recently that I was brought in as a fractional COO because their founding COO got burned out and transitioned out abruptly. And I came in. He wanted me to keep the trains on the tracks, but also try to find those efficiencies and improvements. And I stepped in and like immediately saw their accounting systems and structures were a mess. They're having duplicate payments. They actually had a U.S. and a European subsidiary, and so they had two accountants, a bookkeeper, four bank accounts, and it just was a mess. And there were probably 4 or 5 people who were spending 5 hours a week on reviewing things, getting emails, and it was completely unnecessary. So I quickly created, a strategy and a tactic that reduced everything down and made it streamlined, adopted a software that helped with all that and really
Hmm.
streamlined that and gave back a lot of time to the founder and CEO as well as reduced costs with accountants.
What's like the biggest hidden cost that you are seeing in organizations?
A lot of the time, it's that lack of investment in the internal operations, in the systems and the structures, whether you're talking about cross departmentally or the true internal operations, the accounting, finance, et cetera. What tends to happen is leaders outsource and bring on staff and strategize the product development, the service, the marketing, the outward facing aspects of the organization. They don't invest internally. And reason why that's such a cost suck is that, sorry for that word, is that it draws the founder, CEO, and executives into internal operations because it's not functioning properly. They have to see everything. They don't let go of control, and they end up getting stuck in there instead of spending their time. The old adage goes, working in the business instead of on it.
Mhm.
So on that, why do you think, and it's true in lots of areas of life, when you have an external person, suddenly they can see things that you can't see whilst you're in it. Do you think that's mainly what's happening there is they're so in it that they can't step back from it to see what might be causing some of these operational issues?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. One is I think the internal operations piece is often not the zone of genius for the CEO or founder, and so they don't to them, counting is accounting, HR is accounting, HR is HR. They don't see that, by having this platform, we can reduce our time, reduce our errors, that sort of thing. And so there's a lack of knowledge, and then add that on with the not seeing internal operations as a place to invest, it
Mm,
gets missed. Once an organization is running, I think for the most part, even outside of internal operations, uh, organizations are run by humans. Humans are creatures of habit. We like comfort. We don't like operating out of fear and the unknown. And
mm,
so we just stick with what we know and we don't create the mechanisms in our organization to constantly be vetting, is this the right way to do it and how to do it?
mhm. Do you think, I wonder if, especially with AI, but this has been true with technology forever, people being worried that if things become more efficient, they'll be out of a job, or if something changed, they wouldn't be as needed. Do you think that drives some of it?
I think there's always that fear.
Mhm,
But the way I look at this is by creating efficient, effective operations, you're able to do so much more. So it's not about if I knock off 10 hours of my week by creating efficiency, therefore I've priced myself out of the job. What you've allowed yourself to do is take that extra 10 hours and invest it into doing more with your time.
mhm, mhm. So it sounds like you're probably brought in, considering you said, John, that it's not a place where people think that they need to invest. And when it becomes painfully obvious to them that it is a place that they need to invest. So are you often coming in to sinking ship?
Not necessarily sinking ships. Sometimes yes, but a lot of times it's the CEO coming and saying, "Hey, I know what I know what I don't know, and there are obviously some things we're missing, or things are running smoothly now, but we want to go to the next level, and we want to make sure that foundation is there. So how do we do that? How do we make sure we have the right alignment?" I also work with a lot of startups too, so that's obviously hopefully catching them before there's major issues, before the growth gets dampened by the lack of operations, and they really come to me from a number of different directions. But you kind of pinpointed the problem with the struggle I have in marketing and outreach is like first I have to convince them that there is a problem, even if they don't know there's a problem. And so showing them what we can do, how we do it, and if they try to grow from a place of knowledge, of filling the gaps and holes of where they are, they're able to have a lot better strategic plans because they have better metrics, better decision making, and can shoot for higher goals.
Makes sense.
You brought up this growth mindset, and the inverse perhaps was inferred, the scarcity mindset. And we see this gravity between like a regression to the status quo. And with change management, it's really hard to first introduce change, let alone keep people on that new path. How are you like you've managed budgets up to 7 million cross department implemented cross department change? How do you go about that, I guess? How do you communicate that, demonstrate that to people to get buy-in across so many different personalities and departments?
Yeah, I think the first part is just being open, honest, right? I think a lot of times leaders are not willing to do that. Just have the honest conversation of saying, "Hey, look, what we've been doing is not working, or what we've been doing is working for now, but we know it's not going to work in the long term." And just being open, honest about where things have not hit the mark before in the direction you're going. And throughout this process, I mean, you have to be willing to adapt, tweak, and change your language and how you're doing that. I was working with an organization where I brought it as a change agent COO, and the organization had 2 years of decline, had just reduced half their staff. And I really went through and built rebuilt every department one by one. And I started seeing that using the word change was being very disruptive because they and the employees' eyes were like, well, change. Why do I have to change? I've been doing what I've been told to do. So I had to change that to redirection. And I did it under the umbrella of what we were doing before isn't working. Not your fault, but now we're going to redirect people's energy, people's activities to go down a different path that's going to make us more successful.
It's funny, like, you know, hearing you say that you would buy change in a catalog any day of the week. We pay for trips. We like to visit new restaurants. We like to buy new clothes. Why is it when change is introduced to my schedule, I recoil in terror?
It's just it's the fear of the unknown, right? We get stuck in comfort habits and fear, and I think that's the basis for it. Is people people have a tendency to say it's better to be operating in what I know than venture into the unknown. And you're talking about people's livelihood with jobs. You're talking about the owners' money, their livelihood, their business, their baby, all these kinds of things. I was once told by a CEO and founder that I brought the idea of bringing more visual video content to our viewership, which was like known to be the key thing for them. And told me like that's not how I envisioned the business when I started 20 some years ago. I'm like, okay, so before TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, you didn't envision video being a key content generator. And so he just kind of got stuck in how he saw this business from the very, very beginning and a hard time breaking away from that. So I kind of had
Mm.
to, sometimes I have to chip away little by little. I just have to, well, let's just test this out. Let's just make some changes. And most of the changes that I've implemented, they're not, changing your mission, changing your services, we're just making little tweaks and changes to move the needle as far as results go, as
Mhm.
well as making the operations run more effectively.
You've also led global expansion and international operations. I remember like New York having a distinct accent from the West Coast, and now that seems to have flattened. Are you seeing like Instagram and TikTok kind of flattening the global culture where there's less change, or are there still some like complexities when integrating a multicultural team?
Yeah, I think, as things become more international, people just get used to hearing different dialects and how people speak and not that kind of like, what did they just say? I didn't understand a word they said. So there's that part of just the very
Hmm.
understanding of it. And I think as also from just terminology that's used. I mean, we still have a little bit miscommunication, I think, from time to time with people from different languages. But I think as it continues to become more of an international business globe and people using outsourced people and overseas, that sort of thing, they become to learn what terms to use and how to really relate to other people better.
I perhaps set that up too literally. I was trying to guide you in the more abstract. Like, are there some cultural surprises that still pop up as you're working internationally to look out for?
Yeah, I mean, I think there always is. Even looking at how HR laws exist in Europe versus here, right? So a little more than culture, right? But there are things that just like have to happen. Like people going into Europe from the United States, and then they hear that in Belgium you get paid for 14 months of work for 12 months of work, that sort of thing. There's shifts in even the regulations of that. Culturally, I think it's starting to level out. Like I mean, like you alluded to earlier, that there's less of that, but there is still those local nuances of how people speak to one another, how they relate to one another, and having to realize that everyone's coming from a different culture. And I think this is where going into things with the understanding that we're all working together, we're all rowing the same boat. And when there are misunderstandings and differences, to just keep that in mind.
Mm. I would imagine that applies generationally too, right? If you've got,
100%.
I think, 3 or 4 different generations in the workplace at the same time that all have very different ways that they see the world or the way that they expect things to be,
Yeah, and I
that's
think
gonna.
that goes back to what we were talking about earlier about, um, just the culture of allowing people to speak up.
Mm,
There, 30, 40 years ago, it was stay in your lane. Like that's above your pay grade. That's not your department. And today with small organizations and how virtual they are, how digital they are, everyone has a very good insight into how that business is run and how different departments affect their job and vice versa. And that's
mm,
really where that opening up needs to happen. And I've led some cultural workshops around generational gaps, and that's always what we have to talk about again is rowing the same boat, same direction, understanding that everyone is coming to this with positive intent.
mhm. So I wanted to go back to, because you referenced that sometimes through your own sales and marketing, you might have to highlight a problem that people don't realize is there. I wonder if you can give an example of a problem that might be happening that might not be obvious to leadership, but what the impact of that problem is. And is it mainly financial, or other impacts as well?
Yeah, I'll start with kind of one of the indicators that I tend to lean into, which is the CEO founders who are burned out. They're working 68 hours a week, but nothing seems to be moving. And again, they get stuck in doing the same thing, and they don't have that mechanism to analyze. And so coming in and showing them, hey, if we make this tweak over here, this tweak over here, this tweak over here, we can save 10, 15, 20 hours of your week, getting you out of some stuff, having you trust the process and really move the needle forward, and just walking them through that process of they're too much in the weeds, they're controlling too much, and helping them step out of that is key. Which also then kind of becomes a little bit more of an executive coaching role as part of this process, just as much as the operational changes.
Because I would imagine that if we were all robots, it would be very easy to say, just change this process. But we've got human beings that, like we said, might not like change, might have some form of level of control that they want to have or that they don't want to let go or something like that. So, would you say more of what you do is on the human, more emotional side to go through this, or is it more practical and logical?
I wouldn't say it's more. I would say that's the harder
Mm.
part,
Right.
is getting someone to see the forest through the trees.
Hmm.
And the letting go part is huge. When again, I think from psychologically, leaders are supposed to lead. They're supposed to be the visionaries. That sort of mindset. Um, but it's also just fear. Again, it's fear of the unknown, and we combat fear with controlling everything. I want to see every email that comes through. I want to see every bill that comes through. I want to see every bill at every stage of the accounting process, which is completely unnecessary. And that's where their time gets eaten up, right? In those oversights and over transparency of reviewing every little single thing, even when it's not ready for a decision.
So we're entering an era where AI is meeting operations. Perhaps in some ways it's helpful, and other ways perhaps not. Where are you seeing AI actually help leaders versus where is it just fancy reporting?
Yeah, for people kind of afraid of AI still, you know, I'm not that believer that they're going to replace our jobs anytime soon. I have a daily argument with ChatGPT when it literally will say, "Yes, I can do this for you," and it doesn't at all. I'm like, "You literally just said you could do it. I challenged you on it. You doubled down. Like, yes, I'm sorry." So like, I don't think
You're right.
AI is there to like fully take over our jobs anytime soon. But certainly it's not going away, and it's going to continue to advance. And so learning AI right now, learning to adopt it in your, as a leader, and then, siphoning that down to your team is amazing. Taking a 40-page document and having ChatGPT review it and give you the highlights, help use it as almost an internal dialogue and discussion like you would with your best friend over a business strategy and play devil's advocate. These are the ways that without getting, having to know the ins and outs of ChatGPT or AI, these are the ways to really start utilizing it to help you grow your business and get new ideas.
If you had to design a curiosity KPI for the next 12 months, what would be on that dashboard?
I would say for me, a lot of it comes down to the culture aspect. In the mindset, the operation, the culture, to me, all overlaps. You can't really fix one without fixing the other, and they all kind of overlap. But that culture piece is huge because if you're going to think bigger, grow bigger, if you're going to change your operations, even from the ground up, you got to have that culture that allows that to happen. And so, one of the key indicators for a curious culture is creating psychological safety, which again is that atmosphere that allows people to speak up, speak out, and bring ideas. That to me is one of the best metrics if you're moving towards being a curious leader.
What should CEOs stop doing today if they want to grow through operations instead of in spite of them, like you said?
So a couple of things, start getting out of the weeds. Stop again, seeing the invoices, the bills that are coming in. I've worked with so many CEOs who refuse to let anyone but themselves send out an invoice to a customer. Like it blows my mind. It's not rocket science. No customer is going to leave you because of some wording in an invoice. Like it just, if they do, like, they have other problems, right? So just getting out of the weeds and trusting your team, trusting the process. And again, the second part of that is allowing your team to be a part of it. Forget the fact that you have to have all the ideas. You have to solve all the problems. You have to find all the problems. Utilize your team in that process by having regular conversations with them, not about how they are doing, but what they're seeing in your business.
When you're talking about that, it kind of reminds me of the human body. And I remember, I forget off the top of my head the actual stat, but just the amount of like processes happening inside your body right now. And we're completely oblivious to it. We just go about our day. It's just like, I want to say it's like, in the nine figures of just operations every like minute. Um, and so I don't know. I drew that analogy when you're talking about kind of staying out of the weeds.
Mhm. Yeah, and another part of that, again, with we're talking about habits is, there's a stat that's being thrown around right now that by the time you're 35, 95% of your emotions, your thinking, your actions are all habitual. You're not thinking about them. You're just going through the emotions. I'm someone who like my routine every morning is the exact same. I get out of bed, I do this, I do this, I do this. My first probably 30, 45 minutes of the day is the same every single day. Um, but the key is we got to like, sure, I brush my teeth first, not a big deal. It helps me make sure my breath smells good. But when it comes to our business operations, right, like what we've been doing over and over again is becomes habitual and we don't create those mechanisms in there to challenge what we're doing. And that's what being the curious leader is all about.
Yeah. Well, another thing a curious leader does is use ChatGPT during a podcast. So I checked, and apparently we have 30 to 40 trillion cells in our body. So if you want to count whatever the cells are
How
doing,
many
like that's
zeros is that?
what's that?
How many zeros is that?
Oh, a 12.
It's a lot of zeros.
And then let's see. I don't even know what number this is, but 18, 18 followed by 18 zeros. So that'd be trillion, quadrillion, quintillion, I guess, 18 quintillion processes, perhaps. So anyway,
And we're
food for thought.
so
Yeah.
I like that analogy actually with the human body, because if we had to be consciously involved in each of those processes, we wouldn't do anything else. So it's kind of letting the organism do what it needs to do. Do you think, John, that you see that need to be in control and be everything be visible to me? Is that more so going on with founders because it's their baby, they're more attached to it, or do you see that across the board?
I would say it's chronic with founders because
Hmm.
it is their baby and they started it with just themselves or just with a partner, that sort of thing. And so they, at a certain point, usually they were doing everything, and so it's harder to let go. But even with CEOs with an established business organization, they still fall into the same problems because they're ultimately responsible, and they're responsible for what gets done and how it gets done, and if there's any mistakes that are made. And so there still is that fear of how do I make sure people are doing what they're supposed to be doing if I'm not micromanaging them? And
Hmm.
and that still, I think, is a something that plagues our leaders, is just that micromanagement aspect that we got to learn to let go of.
And it's not only, I think, from the leaders' side, of course, they're getting into the weeds, it's inefficient, they're taking up too much time that they could be doing for other things. But they're also likely pushing away their better talent that feel that they're being micromanaged. And that has a knock on effect as well. It's a nasty cycle for everybody.
Yeah, one organization I was working with, yeah, when I was that the organization where I was rebuilding a department, there was a manager that I sensed she was micromanaging her staff and not utilizing them properly, not keeping them busy, that sort of thing, all year round. And so I had some conversation with her, and she's like, "No, I'm not micromanaging, but feel free to talk to my staff. If I am, I want to know." And when I talked to her staff, I said, "Hey, does your manager micromanage you?" And no, of course not. Love her, great manager. Like, okay, if you're given a task to do and there's 10 steps and you get it done in 5 with better results, are you going to be in trouble? Oh, yeah. I have to follow her steps. Like, well, that's micromanagement. And it came out like I also had a suspicion that one of her staff just wasn't being utilized properly. A great person. I thought she's a star of our team. And I leaned into this too late because she ended up leaving the organization. In her exit interview, she said, "I am busy 3 months out of the year. The rest of the time, I have to find something to do." So even though this manager was micromanaging her team, she still missed the fact that she wasn't properly utilizing a star person on our team and could have done so much more because she wasn't having that honest dialogue.
Mhm. Yeah, it comes back to that transparency or that psychological safety
Mhm.
for it to
Yep.
be able to be brought to the forefront.
Yep.
As we draw to a close, John, is there anything that we didn't touch on that you'd like to highlight?
Um, I think one of the easiest things to start doing that any leader can do, any manager can do, any CEO, any founder can do, is just start talking to your team, and not talking to your team about how well a job they are doing or not doing, but truly just having that open dialogue of what can we do in this organization to make your job easier, to make your job better, what could we do this organization to make my job easier and better? Just having those open dialogues, which anyone can do at any time, at any level,
Mm.
probably will go the furthest in helping people solve some problems and take the organization further.
Becky and I spoke to this really brilliant psychologist in Silicon Valley who like helps elite founders. She reminded me, I'm not like in any way, just I guess title wise, she reminded me of the show Billions, where they have like their in-house psychologist that
Yeah.
keeps them performing at a top level. What did she say, Becky? Like her kind of takeaway was ask like 5 contacts or something like that that know you. Like,
Mhm.
what's one thing you see me doing that I'm not doing? Do you remember, Becky, how she worded that?
Not exactly, but it was something along the lines. I think it was 2 questions. What am I doing that I shouldn't be doing, and what am I not doing that I should be doing, or
Yes,
something around
that's
that.
good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
does that? Go ahead, John.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Yeah, and again, I think it's something that is often used in review process about the employees, but
Mm.
rarely is it done from the management or executive side. And that's really where I think change can happen when there's that vertical dialogue both
Mm.
directions.
Mm.
Are you familiar at all with the International Coaching Federation or ICF? Have you
I'm
heard that?
not. Mm.
It primarily focuses on like training and accreditation for executive coaching, and they've done a number of studies. And on one of them, they found a 500 to 700% ROI with leadership coaching, like you mentioned, because of that compounding effect of the impact you can have on your team. And I think it's probably even bigger than that, to be honest, because if you're helping people like work better, you're helping them live better. And if you're helping people live better, you're helping communities operate better, et cetera. So um, I'm bullish on coaching, and so it's a pleasure hearing your angle on it in terms of like operations, growth mindset. A lot of that resonates with us. Where can people get in touch with you? Check out what you're doing. Where would you like to point people?
Yeah, sure. So my consulting site is think-lateral.com.
Mhm.
Company's Lateral Solutions. And then my personal brand site is Jon Basford, Jon, like a bass fish and a Ford car.com. And those are the two best ways to follow what I'm doing. And we're going to probably do some revamps here soon and have some exciting things coming up. Also, you can connect with my socials on those two websites as well.
Excellent. Well, thanks for talking to us today.
Thank you for having me.